Thank you so much for joining us today for the 13th module conducted by the Snow Leopard Network. And we're really excited to have all of you join us today for this module. I think we're expecting about 20 participants or 25 participants. So just a quick introduction to the module before I hand it over to the facilitators. So this module is going to be looking at the basics of environmental education, a little bit of introduction to the theory, followed by indigenous ways of incorporating environmental education, or indigenous ways of talking about environmental education, which will be held in the second session. And then in the third and the fourth session, we're going to be looking at how can we incorporate how can we incorporate environmental education and nature education in the classrooms through teacher training. So we have some awesome facilitators with us for the modules ahead. And today, the first facilitator is going to be Professor Rochelle Gould, who will be going through the introduction. Followed by, in the second session, we have people from the land of the snow leopard, who will be walking us through indigenous incorporation into environmental education. And for the third and the fourth session, we have people called Vena and Roshni from nature classrooms, who's going to be discussing how we can introduce nature-based learning into the classrooms. So yeah, we hope that you're gonna learn from this and you're gonna be able to incorporate it. And we hope there's also going to be a lot of cross-sharing as well. So over to you, Rochelle.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ranjani. And good evening or afternoon or morning, depending on where you are. It's first thing in the morning here in Vermont, United States. So I'm really happy to be here with all of you and to be part of this awesome panel, this really impressive panel that's coming up, and honored to be able to kick it off here. So I will jump in and share my slides, hopefully without much craziness. Are you all seeing those slides? Let's see. Now, are you seeing them? Yes, no? Are you seeing the slide?
Yes, Rochelle, we can see them.
Okay, perfect. Great. Let me just get the chat out because I want to start. So this is me. My name is Rochelle Gould, and I'm going to be giving you, as Ranjani introduced, an introduction to the idea of environmental education. And I have been studying and teaching environmental education for about the last 10 years or so. I started the work during my postdoctoral scholarship, and I've been incorporating this work into my teaching and my research, again, for the last decade or so. And And I want to start out by asking you all a question, which is, I just would love to know where you stand in terms of thinking about environmental education. So if you could, in the chat, enter some sort of answer to these questions. So what does environmental education mean to you? Another way of thinking about that is, what comes to mind when you think of environmental education? So if you could just enter in the chat, this could be a few words. It doesn't have to be long. So keep it to, let's say 10 words or less. Just top of mind, what does environmental education mean to you? 10 words or less. Great, thank you, Justine. Yeah, you can put single words also is fine if that's easier. Great, thank you.
Sorry, Patul Bali has raised his hand, Rochelle.
Oh, great. Okay, yes, thank you. Thank you. I wasn't looking at that. Fatul, did you want to comment? Go for it. Maybe not. Well, feel free to chime in by speaking, Fatul, if that becomes possible for you. So what else do we have? We have values, biodiversity, engaging children, rising awareness, educating future leaders, making aware about environmental conservation, studies of how our actions can impact the environment, exploring environmental issues, knowledge and values for nature, a process of exchanging knowledge on environmental issues between educators and learners, more precisely facilitating. Wonderful. Okay, this is really helpful. So we have reconnecting with nature. I don't think I said that one. Yep. Knowledge about the surrounding world. Okay. Wonderful. Educating on nature and its importance. Okay. Really helpful. Thank you. And it's really helpful for me to hear the way you're all approaching this issue. And I think it's helpful for all of us, all of you, to see the larger picture and to see the way that everyone else. It's helpful for me to know this as I sort of launch into describing environmental ed. I also think it's helpful for all of you to see what others in the room, the electronic room, are thinking. Okay, educating on nature and its importance. Wonderful. Okay, well, I will talk about many of these things. So many of the things you've mentioned are in the definition that I'm going to present to you about environmental education. It's a multifaceted concept, and the responses that you've given in the chat really capture a lot of that. It's a complex suite of processes and actions that many of which you capture, which have to relate to the relationship between humans and the natural environment. Okay, so before I jump into getting a little more specific about that definition, I would love to just give you this note on process, which is that I love questions. So please feel free to ask questions at any point during the next couple of hours. This is a longer session, which gives us the wonderful benefit and advantage that we can have more interaction. So please feel free to write questions in the chat or to raise your hand at any point, and I will try to pay attention. But also, Ranjani and Snow Leopard folks, if you see that I'm missing something, if you could be watching those things and let me know if I'm missing a chat comment or a hand, like with Fatul, that would be perfect. So basically, I want to be here as a resource for you. I'm going to start the conversation, give you some frameworks and resources to think about, but I'd really like to be able to hear what's on your mind, what questions you have, etc. So this goes for any time. I will open it up at certain points for questions, but anytime, feel free to ask. And on that note, Fatul, you don't have anything to say, right? I think that's just an accident hand. Okay, wonderful. Well, what I'm going to start out with is talking about the Tbilisi Declaration. The Tbilisi Declaration is first of all, what is Tbilisi? So Tbilisi is a city in Georgia. So just to let everyone know where we're talking about, Georgia is this country on the Black Sea, here indicated on the map. And the declaration is called that after the place where a conference happened. It was the first major international meeting on environmental education. So this declaration was in 1977. So we're getting on to close to the 50-year anniversary of the first international meeting discussion of environmental education. And really this was the place where the formal definition that's used most frequently now was created, that international representatives agreed on what environmental education is. And there we go. So here's the definition that emerged from Tbilisi. According to the Tbilisi Declaration, environmental education is a learning process that increases people's knowledge and awareness about the environment and its associated challenges, develops the necessary skills and expertise to address the challenges, and fosters attitudes, motivations, and commitments to make informed decisions and take responsible action. So this is a long definition. There's a lot going on in this definition, which is part of why I started by saying environmental education is a very rich, multifaceted concept and practice and field. So a lot of the things that you all said in your comments are coming up here, right? So to note a few of the things you said on your comments and how they show up in this definition. So a number of you mentioned preparing people. So a couple of you mentioned maybe preparing to take action. So studies how our actions can impact the environment, Namrata. So that point, this idea of how our actions impact the environment is largely about awareness. So this is being aware of the actions that we take and the implications they have for the rest of the environment. So there was a lot in your answers of exploring environmental issues and sharing information. So that gets into the knowledge piece. A lot of it is it's education. It's about sharing information. It's about sharing knowledge. I also like to comment, one of you mentioned facilitating this, I think it was Iftikhar, maybe, precisely facilitating. I really like that definition of facilitating, which gets at this process. So that's important to think about environmental education, not as a sort of one-time, one-way spout of information moving from teacher to learner, but a process. And so that idea of facilitating a process. So I really appreciate that comment. And let's see if there was anything else. So aware, so from food making aware about environmental conservation, absolutely, that's awareness. And then engaging children gets at this idea of skills. So we'll talk more about what does it mean to develop the necessary skills for taking action. And then so some about attitudes. I think Justine mentioned values and Ranjani connecting to nature. So those relate to attitudes. And then again, a couple of you mentioned action. So important to this definition, the final endpoint of the definition of environmental education is this idea of action. So we'll talk more about that. And this can be harder to integrate into environmental ed. And we'll talk about that as we go on. Okay,